Hey everyone, this is Dan Deppin with Fusion Notes. In this video, I'll be talking about 10 places that you can go to buy notes right now. So one of the biggest questions that comes up in the Bigger Pockets forums and in live meetups like the one I was at here in Denver just this past week is, new note investors are always asking, well, where can I go to buy notes? Generally, they start to Google it and they find places like FCI Exchange, but then they kind of get stuck beyond that. So I thought I'd make a video to kind of point new note investors in the right direction and maybe give them some leads and other sources that they may or may not come across just by using Google. So where can we go to buy notes? I'll give you 10 sources here, and I want to comment that these are in no particular order. So my number one source doesn't mean that's necessarily the best one. The number 10 is not necessarily the worst. And the other is that I hear from some note investors that the market is tight, there are too many buyers, there's not enough supply, prices are too high, and I disagree with that. If you do your homework and you find some of these other harder to find sources, I think there's plenty of supply of notes out there, and you can get them at good prices where there's lots of value and plenty of meat left on the bone. But obviously, the easier it is to find a source and buy from it, the higher the pricing is going to be. And on some of these easier to find sources, you got to be careful with the asset quality as well. Some of them can kind of be dumping grounds for bad assets sometimes. But these harder to get to sources take a lot more work to find, but along with that goes better pricing. And depending on how serious you want to be about notes, whether you want to have a larger portfolio or whether you want to build a real notes business, I think it's well worth your time to develop some of those harder to get to assets. If you're just buying one or two notes, then the work may or may not be worth it for you. So getting into it now, the first note source is Granite Strategic Investments. So these guys have an online platform that's pretty good. They release tapes on a regular basis. What I kind of like about them is they'll provide you the collateral up front. So some sources you buy from, they'll give you a tape. It may have limited information. You'll make an indicative bid. And then once that gets accepted, you'll see all the collateral and maybe even not see the pay history until then. And then a lot of times you end up either having to back out of bids or fading bids. What's kind of nice about these guys is they give you most everything up front, which just makes life a lot easier and more simple. And it's definitely one of the easier places to buy. The second one you may not have heard of is Kondaur Capital. I bought 3 notes from these guys before. They generally have a lot of supply. If you tell them what you are looking for and what some of your criteria are, they'll pull you a tape that matches that criteria so they can save you some of the filtering. I have heard from some note investors who have had bad experiences with these guys. My personal experience has been very positive. So I work with Evan Williams there, and I said I've bought 3 notes from them, and so far my personal experience has been good, but mileage can always vary. The third one is FCI Exchange, which if you've done any Googling at all looking for notes, you've probably come across this. It's an online exchange. They generally have a large supply of notes. It's probably the easiest place to go to and buy. And along with that, of course, comes generally higher pricing and sometimes really sketchy assets. In some cases, really bad stuff, so you have to be careful. So I think FCI is good from the standpoint if you're a new note investor and you just want to look at some notes that are on offer and begin to go through some of the pricing and start to analyze some of them. It's pretty good. As far as buying, I would just kind of tread lightly and be careful. I personally have not bought from here. That doesn't mean I wouldn't. I would just be careful. So the next place is Paperstac, which is another online exchange. I've not bought from Paperstac. What I do like about them is it's a really slick, modern platform. They have a really good filtering ability, so you can go in there and put in the criteria that you're looking for and narrow it down to the notes that you really want to go look at. The other one is Notes Direct. So, this is affiliated with Note School and Eddie Speed. I'm not part of Note School, and I haven't bought from Notes Direct myself, but I'd say they're a very reputable seller, and I believe they also provide the collateral up front, which is nice. And if you sign up through their website, I believe you got to fill out an NDA, and then you can begin to download tapes. And you'll notice they give pricing, and they have different prices depending on whether you're a part of Note School, and if so, what level of Note School you are. And if you're not part of that at all, then they'll have a column for the retail pricing. And I've looked at some of these tapes before. I found the retail pricing to be fairly expensive, but the trade-off from that is I don't think they're gonna try to pawn off a really crappy asset like you might find somebody doing on FCI Exchange or something like that. The next one is Watermark Exchange. So Val Sotir runs this. Pretty much everyone in the note industry that you come across knows Val. They've got a pretty healthy supply, and they have a lot of assets listed on their website. But if you contact Val directly, a lot of times he'll get me tapes of things as they come in before they hit the website. This is actually where I bought my first note. And Val was real great to work with, through that process. So if you're a little bit new and you got some questions, this is a good place to go. Like any exchange, you got to be careful with the pricing, but it's a good, reputable, solid place to go by. Okay, so getting into some of the other more, not so much specific places to go, but more broader categories. So talking about brokers. So there are a number of reputable brokers out there. If you're going to work with a broker, make sure it's a good one. Like Dave Polio at SNSC is a good one. I bought from him. But what you need to be careful of is there are a lot of joker brokers out there. So if you become active in notes and you're posting about notes on some of the different Facebook groups and other areas, you'll begin to get emails from people with tapes. And oftentimes what a joker broker is doing is they're taking a tape from somewhere else and they're presenting it as if they own it, and they're just trying to get you to buy it from them and then collect the spread, and those things are a nightmare. So you want to stay away from that. One of the things that I do when someone contacts me and I'm not sure who they are, one, I'll ask my network if they know them. The other thing I do is every tape I get, I save it. And so I've got a little system that I use within Dropbox to keep the tapes organized. But when I get a tape from someone I don't know, I'll often do a search on some of the assets through that Dropbox folder, and lo and behold, a lot of times they show up from other places and I can tell where they got the tape from. So stay the hell away from joker brokers, be very careful there. But like I said, the other reputable ones like Dave Polio are fine to go look at, although the pricing can be kind of high. And then banks and hedge funds. These are interesting. So now this is where we start to go deeper, and you're getting to the sources that are not necessarily, you can't just call them up and buy from. You need to build relationships over time. There are a number of hedge funds out there, and I do a lot of work through email campaigns to reach them and do some other outreach through LinkedIn. And then the other one is banks. And so you'll talk to, there's some known investors out there who will tell you that you can't, an individual investor can't buy direct from banks. That is not true, because I know several people who have done it themselves. I've not personally bought from banks yet on my own, but I know a bunch of people who have done it. You absolutely can. It takes some persistence and some work. You got to contact a lot of different people before you're going to find someone that's going to sell to you. If you just make 2 phone calls and you don't get anywhere, and then, sometimes people do that. They make a couple phone calls, doesn't work out, and then they declare that, oh yeah, that proves you can't buy from banks. Well, that's not true. It takes a lot of work, a lot of persistence, but you absolutely can do it. If you want to build a larger scale note business, at some point you have to do that, I think. The next one is attorneys. So this may be one that you haven't thought of, but attorneys are really great connectors. They just know everybody. And a lot of times, once you have relationships with attorneys, if you tell them, hey, I'm looking to buy notes, I've got this amount of capital, do you know anybody that's selling? A lot of times they can hook you up with other people. And some of these attorneys that work a lot in the notes business have their own portfolios, their own businesses, and some of them will almost like semi-broker for other people. So do that as well. And then the other big one is talking to other note investors or other real estate investors. So this picture is from April in Cape Coral. So this is part of Scott Carson's mastermind group, which I'm a part of. That's me over there and my wife. But networking with other note investors is a great way to get a lead on notes and also a lead on sources. So if you're new to note investing and you're kind of you find it a little daunting to get through the due diligence process and you're worried about making a mistake, one of the things you can do, and this is what I did on my very first note, was you can joint venture with an experienced note investor. So the way that this typically works is you have one investor puts up the funding to buy the note, and then the other JV partner will do the sourcing of the note and all the work to work it out and get a return. And then depending on the person you're joint venturing with, some of them will just want purely passive investors, but others like myself are more willing to allow someone to follow along and share all the details so that they can understand more about how the deal worked and feel more comfortable with note investing before they venture out on their own. There are a lot of note investors out there who sometimes have quite large portfolios, and sometimes they're just cleaning up their portfolios, or they're trying to free up funds to do some other deal. And then the last one is there are a lot of other traders who are not necessarily hedge funds, but some of them used to work at hedge funds or have quite large portfolios and will peel off individual notes or groups of notes to other investors. In fact, I recently purchased a note from someone like this. So as you get deeper into the note industry and you talk to more people and network, you'll begin to uncover more and more sources of notes. But ultimately, you're going to need to get away from the FCI exchanges of the world and get into some of these harder to find sources to get the right pricing. So wrapping up this quick video, there's really no shortage of supply on the market, and there's good pricing to be had as well, or good value in deals. You're not necessarily going to be able to do a Google search and find a bunch of great notes with value, but if you put in a little bit of work, the market is very, very healthy, and with some of the other there's a large supply of non-performing notes out there, and I think there's a lot more supply getting ready to come online in the coming year. Some of the banks return to some of the lending practices that they were doing prior to the financial crisis. And obviously, the easier it is to get to something, you're going to have higher pricing. You need to be more careful about the quality of the assets. But if you have the time and you're willing to put in the effort to develop the higher quality sources, I think it's well worth it. Just keep in mind that you have to play a long game. It's not something that you're just going to be able to do overnight. But if you're willing to stick with it for several months, you can really develop some really cool sources, which is what I've been doing over the last 6 months or so. So that's what I have for you. Hope that helps, and I'll see you next time.